This simulation is sequenced in a series of stages. It's a technique that makes massive use of the index switch. Now, the file for this scene is available for free on my gumroad, because this isn't a 45-minute video where I painstakingly place every last node and noodle, though there is some of that. No, this is an 8-minute video where I explain my stages system, then show you how I've used it in a scene in a file that's easily available to you. This feels like a pretty decent compromise, the marriage of my laziness and our diminishing capacity for long-form content. Speaking of which, stay to the end for some exciting channel news. Okay, you ready? Let's go. I've applied a geometry nodes modifier to the default cube, thrown away the group input, and added a simulation zone. I want some points to plug into this, so I'm adding a curved circle with a resolution of 4 and a radius of 2, filling it as a single n-gon, subdividing that n-gon by 4, then turning this mesh to points with a mesh to points node. This gives us a diamond of points. It's neither crazy nor shining on, but it is evenly distributed. So, starting with the basics, if I add a set position node in the simulation zone, plugging a vector into the offset with 0.1 on the Y, then press play, all the points offset 0.1 on Y on every frame. But let's say I want to go in more than one direction and replace the vector with a switch. I'd need some way of telling this switch when to switch. For this, we need a clock, a named attribute that counts the frames that have passed. It keeps this record of passing time by adding 1 to itself, and what with everything in the simulation zone being evaluated on every frame, the points, unlike some people around here, now always know how old they are. Next, a Boolean named attribute called next. This will store the result of comparing the clock to see if it's greater than 30, and we'll use this next named attribute to control the offset switch. Now, when we press play, the diamond moves up, but just like my cousin Brian, takes a hard right at 30. But what if we wanted more than 2 vectors? For this, I'm adding another named attribute, an integer called stage. Each point will start at stage 0. And when the next condition is met, move to the next. We determine the next stage with an index switch driven by the stage attribute. So when next is true at any given stage, it knows which stage to go to next. And oh, the stages it'll go, because the index switch can have multiple items. Here, I'm using 4 in chronological order with 3 going back to 0. But you can get more ambitious if you want. It's your life. Now excuse me while I frame these nodes and name them for what they do. I'm going to replace our vector switch with a vector index switch and the next named attribute with the stage named attribute, giving each stage a different offset. Then the last thing we need to do to make this actually work is reset the clock at the beginning of each stage. We'll do this with a switch and the next named attribute. If next is false, add 1. If it's true, reset the clock to 0. And now, every 30 frames, the simulation moves to the next stage. So far, we have 2 index switches, one for the stage and one for the position. But for the love of threes, we're not going to stop there, because the most powerful use of an index switch is still to come, a Boolean index switch, giving each stage its own condition to move to the next. So the condition for stage 0 can be the clock reaching 30. The stage 1 is when the position on the X is greater than or equal to 3. For stage 2, it's when the clock is greater than a random number between 0 and 30. And for stage 4, it's when the position on the X is less than or equal to -3. Now when I press play, each stage ends on its own terms and conditions. And now, given the conditions aren't all governed by the clock, and there are factors that are different for each point, like position and random number, each point is very much in its own stage, obeying the Boolean laws, but dancing to its own drum. Now, let's go back to our room full of sequenced balls. Let's take a look at the node tree and how, in this specific simulation, I've used the stages system. Stage 0 is the state of our simulation on frame 0, our points having been created by distributing them on a sphere. Unlike the island, we never return to stage 0. We loop back to 1 at the end of stage 4. For our positions, stage 1 mixes the points from their previous stage positions to the start positions of stage 2, which is on rails, the points running the lengths of shortest edge paths curves to stage 3, a particle sim. Then stage 4 is the same as stage 3, but with a little extra sass. Now, here come the conditions. In stage 0 or stage 4, the highest points have an increasing probability of moving to the next stage, where, reaching the start positions of stage 2, they trigger stage 2. Then, in stage 3, when all points have safely arrived, they are snapped into stage 4. It's like when you get off a plane and have to wait for everyone to get on the bus back to the terminal. In the cogs group, we create 3 named attributes to assist in our evaluations. Speed, which stores the difference between the current position and the position from the previous frame. The previous position, which is the current position but updated after the speed is calculated, so it is, like your fashion sense, always out of date. And the stage end position, which is where the point was when it last triggered next. I set this when I generate the points because stage 1 uses it to move the points to stage 2's start position. I also set the initial radius here and simulated the radius's changes because it's used in some of the position calculations. At the end of our node tree in the post-simulation world, icospheres are instanced on our points with radius driving the scale, and 2 last index switches for emission and color. It's always best to evaluate any attribute that doesn't directly affect the simulation outside of it. This way, they can be tweaked and finessed without having to rebake the simulation. So that's it, the index switch stages system. Do enjoy the file, and if there's a groundswell of interest in any specific parts of it, I might do a follow-up video. I might. Let's see. Speaking of future channel activities, next month, the month of June 2024, will be our first birthday. Like most 1-year-olds, we're growing and waddling, and our parents have already secretly decided that we were a terrible idea. The second year of Harry Blends will see some exciting developments, and if you're not subscribed, now's the time because things are about to go down. Trust me, I'm just shook thinking about it. Anyway, thanks for watching. The way of the noodle is the way of life.